guys, it's Pash. I just wanted to do a little tutorial on how to interpret FFlogs as a healer. I had some people asking me how they can look at the information that's there without getting completely and totally overwhelmed. It is a little bit intimidating the first few times that you look at it, but with practice it's not so bad. Um, I'm doing this for healers specifically because looking at a healer parse versus looking at a DPS parse is a very different animal. When you're looking at a DPS parse, you do want to look at your rotation, see how it compares to other players of that class, and to see, where are they using cooldowns and where you could be using cooldowns. But other than looking for things like Battle Litany, Trick Attack, and Hypercharge, which most teams purposefully all use together anyway, you're not as concerned as with what's going on with your peers in the group. Whereas as a healer, you really do need to know, you really do need to know what's your co-healer doing, what are the tanks doing, what's the boss doing at that timestamp, is the damage magical or physical. These are things that make looking at healer parses kind of more like a research project than just a pastime. But it is really information you should get used to looking for, especially if you're just now learning to raid and you plan on raiding more seriously in the Stormblood tiers. This is a skill that you're going to need. For the purposes of this discussion, we're going to be looking at a Lame Brick Strike Box, a 10S parse of mine. It happens to be the one from last week, and also happens to be my best parse to date. And I'll talk a little bit about how I got here, and if we have time, I might go back and look at an older parse of mine, just to show you, how over time you can get better. So when you pull up FFlogs and you're on that main page, just search your own name and it'll bring up this page that you see here. So we're going to look at Lame Brick Strike Box. Now, when you pull up a boss, if you have a lot of clears or even if you only have 2, whatever it is, it'll show you every parse you've ever uploaded for that boss. And you can see when I first cleared this fight, actually I started out doing okay and then got worse for a little while, and then I've been getting consistently better as we go. If you look at this historical percentage versus today's percentage, this is an interesting number to consider. So what this means is that on the day that this parse was uploaded, this percentile was 93 percentile, meaning that puts me in the top 7% of DPS for Astrologians on this fight. If I were to upload that parse today, it would still be a 93%, but the one before that was an 86% when uploaded. If I uploaded that today, it would be an 84. So what this information is telling you is that over time, the player base gets better. More people upload parses with better numbers. So you want to be very aware that while, if you're looking at someone's parse that shows it was, a 98 percentile parse, and oh my god, it's amazing, but you look at the raw DPS number and it's not great, what would that parse actually be today? So we, on Midgard in particular, we have some statics that no longer, that are no longer active, or people have joined new groups, but the players in them will still show up in the All-Stars tab. So be aware of the dates and timestamps on parses and what the today's percentile on them are before you get super caught up on what the number is. But we're going to click into 93% here. So first things first, I want to talk about what each of these tabs is and what information you can find in it. So the summary is self-explanatory. It just gives you an overall snapshot of what's going on in the fight. Damage done by source, healing done by source, damage taken by ability, and any deaths if there were any in that particular encounter, which there were none in ours this week. Then you have damage done. This will just give you everybody's raw DPS. The raid DPS is right here in the corner. And then on the side here, again, it shows you everybody's percentile. Now, this 29% for Antaran, he's on an off class for this fight, so it's an outlier for my team. Usually everybody's blue or purple. But you want to be aware, if you're just looking at this percentile to see, how's your group overall doing, make sure that you take into account things like if a person died, because that will lower their percentile, they'll lower their parse by quite a bit. Or if they're playing an off class for this particular week, Ant is practicing ninja because we're not sure what he's going to go as for the next tier, so we're kind of working on shuffling around players a little bit. Damage taken. This is how many times you got smacked in the face and how hard. Typically your tanks will be the top two in this list unless a DPS or a healer screws up a mechanic so badly that the game says no, fuck you. Uh, so, again, just damage taken. Healing. This is healing done by source. Now, this is interesting to notice. Vel and I run a roughly 53-47 split. Sometimes I'm the 53, sometimes she's the 53. In fact, most of the time, she's the 53. The old healer meta used to be that, you know, the white mage healed all the time and the scholar just DPS and only mitigated when it was truly necessary. You're going to find that your speed running and your execution prioritizing groups no longer run that way, because that is inefficient as far as use of GCDs and use of healer skills. It's great to whip the fairy, and Vel and I whip the fairy quite hard, as you'll see as we get into this, but you do want to make sure that your healers are both getting uptime as much as they are comfortable with. Don't push a healer to DPS more than they're comfortable with, because what will inevitably happen is people will die. So it's a slow process to learn for some people, and just be aware that's a skill and not an innate nature thing. Buffs is a really great tab. I'm going to scroll through quickly, and you're going to see it can be very overwhelming as you first start looking at it, but it is literally every buff that the players use, and the little lines here are the uptime for that buff. So for example, Wanderer's Minuet's a bard skill. You can see that in the very beginning of the fight, in the opener, Luna drops Wanderer's Minuet for probably 2, maybe 3 GCDs, and then he's back in it for the whole thing. So I'll look at the healer buffs in a few. Debuffs, these are debuffs that you as players receive from the boss. So magic vulnerability, prey, bind, knockback, those are things that will show up here in debuffs. Deaths, there's not going to be anything in this tab right now because nobody died this run. But if you pull up a parse where people do have deaths, then you're going to see what killed them, how much damage they took, and any damage leading up to that death that also occurred. So if they got hit 3 times by a dot, or if they got auto-attacked 5 times by an ad that eventually killed them, it will show you all of that information. Interrupts, there's generally nothing here. From what I understand, it is interrupted skills and casts that are large. I don't know. I don't really look at this tab, to be honest, and I'm sure someone will correct me in the comments, but this is not a tab that I generally concern myself with. And dispels, generally speaking, you're going to see your bards, wanderers, paean, or wardens paean, being used on your warrior. And then resources, this is how well your team manages their resources across the fight, so TP, MP, HP. And then casts. This is literally how many things your players cast during the encounter. So cast per minute, Luna, Amashi, our bard, casts almost 40 skills per minute. That's pretty reasonable for a bard because they have a lot of off GCD, same with ninja and dragoon. So you want to look at your cast per minute and decide if they're reasonable, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So we're going to go back to healing. Actually, before we do that, I do want to show you, for example, you can switch this back and forth between players and the boss by clicking this friendlies enemies. So if I want to look at damage done by the boss, then I click this enemies thing right here, and then you can see there's a boss and there's an ad, and this is all the damage they do in the fight. Now the boss himself does most of it, and you can click on it, and it'll bring up all the abilities that he uses throughout the fight. Now, this is this is good because as I start digging into this, I need to know what the boss is doing at a certain timestamp, and I can either pull it up through here and compare it in the graphs, or I also prepared, just in case it's easier for some people to see, I made a highlight of this fight in Twitch so that we can look at the timestamps and see what's going on in real time, and that way, it'll be a little bit more visual. I know there's some people that it's easier for you to see what's going on in an actual fight versus just looking at the log. So, here we go. interpreting your healing tab. We're going to go to healing. Now, I need to turn this off back onto friendlies, excuse me. So you're going to see, okay, Val, Pash, Carmine, Corny, and Luna have all got healing in here. This is most likely Second Wind or Bloodbath or Equilibrium or some combination thereof. So you'll see people show up in the healing tab that aren't healers all the time, and that's fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click my name up here, and I'm going to click Vel's name up here, and then I'm going to click total to turn it off. So what I'm doing here, the very first thing I want to see is I want to look at the overarching heals for the whole fight and see if there's places in here that Vel and I could potentially be overhealing. The really obvious ones that might be overhealing are where you see the purple and the yellow line up at the same time, right here, or here, or here. So what you want to do then is go and dig into what's going on at that point. Do we really need both of those AoE heals? Do we really need, or can we get away with just one? Can we get away with one and a mitigation? Can we get away with none? Sometimes that's an option. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to click my name. And this is going to bring up all of the heals that I cast for the fight. Now, if you look here, Wheel of Fortune, that's Collective Unconscious. It shows up here just as the regen part of that skill. Helios, Aspected Benefic, all these things. And if you look at it, if you're thinking as a healer, in this entire fight, it doesn't tell you for some of these things. This is a dot tick, and these are dot ticks here, so it doesn't tell you how many casts, because that's not information that exists. But I only cast Helios 3 times in the fight. I only cast Aspected Helios, which is the AoE heal over time akin to Medica 2 that Astrologian gets, twice. I cast Aspected Benefic, which is its version of Regen, 14 times. Essential Dignity was used 3 times, and Benefic 2 was cast once. If you are thinking of this in terms of your typical healer experience, that is very little healing. And even with only that little amount of healing, I still landed with a 28.4% overheal. Now, keep in mind, most of that overheal is coming from hot ticks. It's coming from heals over time, so you can't control that. I mean, you can by casting it less if needed, but if, some people tick back up to full faster than others, or if some people didn't get hit with damage in the first place, but you cast the hot because 4 people did, and that's more efficient, that's fine. I typically try to land between a 20 and a 30-ish % overheal for the fight. I feel like that's reasonable because we do abuse heals over time in order to allow us to DPS more. Getting your overheal down in the single digits can be very dangerous, in my opinion. So I aim to be between 20 and 30%. Now again, I'm not the best astrologian ever. I'm not even close. But that's just how I approach things, and again, that may change over time. So we're going to compare my heals over time to Vel's heals over time, and right now I'm only going to care about Aspected Helios and Wheel of Fortune. So if you click this plus sign right here on the right, it's going to bring that and pop it out, and so you can see I cast Aspected Helios once at the beginning and once towards the end of the fight, and then Wheel of Fortune I actually used 4 times, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, here's the cool thing about FFlogs when you're a healer. If I X out of this and go back to all sources of healing, okay, now I can click into Vel. It leaves my information up here and brings up Vel's information. So now what I can do is just click Whispering Dawn, and so you can see where does Whispering Dawn, her heal over time, line up with my heals over time. So you can see right here at 3 minutes in the fight, I just let Vel handle whatever that AoE damage is. And up here at the beginning, that's both of us, and here towards the end, this is both of us. Now this one right here, I'm gonna guess Vel probably didn't have to Whispering Dawn, or I didn't have to Aspected Helios. Now it's not a big deal for Vel to Whispering Dawn because it doesn't affect her own personal DPS whatsoever. She just has to hit a button, she doesn't have to leave Cleric Stance. So what will most likely happen is I will probably drop a hot there. I don't really feel that I should have used Aspected Helios and Collective Unconscious at this point in the fight, but I want to look and see. It may have been possible that things were getting a little sticky for us at this time. So this one right here is really, really low, and I was curious about it when I originally looked over this parse getting ready to do this because it's kind of strange. Like, Vel did a Whispering Dawn, and that wore off, and then I did a Collective Unconscious that didn't do much healing, which is a little strange for that skill. So what I did is I actually came in here to the actual fight and pulled it up. And of course now it's going to be a pain in my butt. And did the playback. And what you can see is when I use Collective Unconscious, I didn't hit everybody in the group. And the people that I did hit in the group were the ones that didn't really take any damage. So at that point, I should not have used that skill. I actually probably should have saved it for the stomps that are coming up in the middle of this steamroller here. So this is the kind of information that you want to figure out when you're using FFlogs. So you can see that was a waste of a skill there. Now, I did it there in my head on purpose, thinking that this Whispering Dawn wasn't going to be enough to heal us back to full, but it ended up being enough. So, again, this is, you got to care about what your co-healer's doing and why. So looking at it, this is a time in the fight when I could probably be in Cleric Stance this entire time, except for casting probably regens on the tanks. So let's get out of what Vel's doing. We're going to close this and close Whispering Dawn, so you can see it actually still leaves it up like that. I'm going to click back into myself, and I want to bring up Aspected Benefic, which is regen. These are all the places in the fight that I'm casting Aspected Benefic on, most likely the tanks. If you mouse over it, it'll show you who all your targets were. So you can see I did Ferris and Corny are our tanks. Myself and Vel, I cast Aspected Benefic on during the Steamroller phase when we're taking praise. And Intern Rouge, I believe, got hit with a knockback, and so I regened them for that. So I want to see how does this stuff line up with what the boss is doing. So what we're going to do is we're going to swap to enemies. And I'm going to swap to damage done. Now again, this is going to leave all of this information up here for me to look at. Okay? And I want to look at this moment right here, this two and a half minute bit of information here. And so if you just start clicking, you can see, okay, Critical Wrath lines up with these heals. That's not what we're looking for. Gobsway, Rumble Rocks, this is the boss's AoE stomps. So this right here, these were two spikes where Vel used Whispering Dawn. And again, since there isn't any damage there right here where I'm using that Collective Unconscious, it's a wasted skill. I shouldn't be using it there. But for the most part, you can see our AoE heals line up with what's those big stomps that the boss does. If you pull up, oops, what did I do here? Click out of that, click grab Rumble Rocks off. Okay, so sometimes it gets annoying because you accidentally click the wrong things. Click back into the boss. Let's look at Goblin Rush, which is a repeated attack that he does before a couple of tank busters. So you can see Goblin Rush right here. We've got hots on the tank, both the Wheel of Fortune and a regen on the tank for both of those. Goblin Rush hits really, really hard, and then he does a tank buster right afterwards, which is called Gob Rush, Rush Gob. And so you can see. Now what's really interesting is you don't see any hots really lining up with this particular tank buster. What very likely happened was we just Essential Dignity or Benefictude him back to full. So this is kind of how you want to manipulate the information in the healing tab. You want to be able to see what's going on with the boss. You want to be able to see where are you healing, where are you over healing. If you go back to damage done and look at the entire graph. Now I could overlay Vel's on here too, just to see. But for the most part, any spikes you have lining up with, or any spikes of damage you have, you should see them lining up with healing going out also. If you have a big damage spike somewhere and there was no heals going out for it, or their heals were super late, or maybe they're super early, that's something that you want to be attempting to fix. The next thing I want to talk about, now that I've shown you how to look at the healing, now I gotta close all this because it's gonna get cluttered. We're gonna go to buffs. I'm gonna switch back to friendlies. And I want to look at just myself. So, looking at myself, here's my cleric stance uptime. That's actually quite good for an astrologian, in my opinion. I did get battle litany in this fight. I drew a balance. Got Fey Wind at the pole, arrow towards the end. I used a pot, probably could have used another one, but I tend to forget that because I'm a little scatterbrained. I used Swift Cast 3 times. So you can see these are really interesting. You can see your uptime on all the skills, both that affect you and that you use. The biggest thing for me that I look at, okay, now we're going to look at collective unconscious in particular. So I'm going to press the plus sign and we're going to see it up here. You want to consider how long your encounter is, how long the recast on a skill is, and if you used it appropriately in the fight, if you could squeeze in another one, if you use too many, which very rare, unless it's like aspected Helios, you're very rarely going to use quote-unquote too many. Collective Unconscious is a 90-second recast, and in a 6.5 minute fight, I have it just enough time to use it 4 times, which I did. Now, again, I discussed a minute ago, this particular Collective Unconscious was wasted use. I mean, it doesn't hurt anything other than me getting out of cleric stance to throw it there. And actually, you know, and I said maybe I could have used it during the steamroller instead to deal with the stomps there. If I used it during this steamroller, what would happen is it would not be available most likely for this moment right here where I do intentionally use it. This is the 4-minute mark in the fight, and I believe if we skip there, it is the triple charge. Yeah, it's triple charge. So I purposely use Collective Unconscious there to heal us up from this stack or spread mechanic that hits us really hard. And then you're going to see in a second here when this Collective Unconscious wears off the group, because it's a very short hot, Vel's going to throw up Whispering Dawn to prep for the stomps that are coming out right now. So you see Whispering Dawn comes up, and all this Wheel of Fortune is going to fall off right now. So that's intentional healing on our part. I need that cooldown at that timestamp. So I can either continue to do this here and have Vel remove that Whispering Dawn that was right before it, or we can ignore the Collective Unconscious use here completely, and I can just be happy with using Collective Unconscious 3 times in the fight. It depends on the team, what they want to do, and I'll probably have a conversation with Vel about that later today, actually. So that's sort of what you're looking at here. Did I use this cooldown enough? Can I use it more often? Should I use it more often? One thing I noticed looking at this parse to prepare for this, and this is the worst healer habit in the world. Don't be me. This is me putting myself up on a poster, I guess, to show you don't be bad. I'm being bad. Don't do it. Okay, Sinistry. This is an amazing skill, you guys. This is the astrologian version of Divine Seal. Using Sinistry 1 time in a 6.5 minute encounter is absolutely inexcusable for a healer. You're wasting your resources. Don't do this. So now, for me personally, when we go into A10S next week, I have to remember to not sit on that button. And the reason I do that is because when I first started playing Astrologian, I didn't think of it like it was a Divine Seal. I thought of it as, oh, I should save this for when I need to heal more than one person at the same time. That's a bad habit. I need to break it. Being aware of a habit is the first step to breaking it. So don't be me. This is the perfect reason to look at FFlogs. This is exactly what you're trying to do as a healer, is figure out where you're being not good. So we got to get good. You know, again, with that, like, I used Swiftcast 3 times because I could, and I'm going to be quite honest, I think 2 of those 3 times I used it for DPS. I could have probably snuck in another 1, maybe 2, probably just 1, right here at this little lull in the action. It's the same cooldown as Collective Unconscious, so it would make sense to use it 4 times. Um, that's what I'm looking at in the buffs tab. I don't really care so much about things like arrow drawn, balance drawn, because you can't control those. Those are RNG. Um, you're going to get what you're going to get, what the cards are going to tell you can use. So I don't really care so much about that. Luminiferous Ether, again, did you use it enough times? That's a totally acceptable number of times to use it in the fight. I'm not really concerned about that. So um, look at your buff usage and decide if you are being efficient with your skills. One thing to notice, certain things don't show up here, but they are things you should be using. And again, I'm going to show you another instance of me being extremely inefficient, and it's simply because I get distracted with stuff. Some stuff doesn't show up in buffs, but it does show up in casts. So I'm going to switch to casts really quickly. I'm going to close this because you don't need it. Now again, this is sorted by me still because I was still into my name. If you pull this up with everyone, it gets a little overwhelming. Then there's things that show up here that won't show up in the buffs tab, and those things are, where are they? Time dilation, I only used it once. Alright guys, again, I'm being bad. That's just straight up bad. That's me not extending heals over time on a tank because I forgot. Or me not extending a card on a DPS because I forgot. And that's not okay. So, again, I'm putting myself on notice in front of everybody. You have to look at your parses and you have to see, where am I overhealing? Where am I not using skills appropriately? Where could I switch a skill for another skill? Because I'll tell you right now, when I first started looking at my parses, those 4 collective unconsciouses were never used, which is horrible. That's horrible. You're throwing away free mana. It's literally free. It doesn't cost you any mana. It costs you half a GCD, and it's a free heal over time. So you should use those things. White mages, you should be using Asylum. You should be using Asylum almost on cooldown, whether you use it on the party for AoE damage or you use it on the tank so you can DPS more. These are things that hardcore raiders think about, plan, manipulate. I could show you pages and pages and pages and pages of Vel and I in our static offline chat. Just, okay, what if we did this? How about if we try that? Just to see where can we squeeze another 10, 50, 100 DPS out of our pair. And it pays off. It pays off in the long run. So, again, I'm putting myself out there. I'm showing my true colors. I'm not great. Disable I use 3 times. That's actually not bad for me. Sometimes I disable just tank busters in fights, and then I'm like, oh, I could totally use that on something else. So you want to be really, really, really looking at that. If you go back and sort the cast by everybody, and we talked about this cast per minute a little bit. Cast per minute, you want to consider, is it reasonable for the fight? So this was a 6.5 minute fight, which is what, 400 seconds maybe, and don't quote me on that number because I'm napkin mathing in my head, but so is 160 casts with a 2.5 second GCD acceptable for a healer? I could pull out a calculator right now and figure it out, but I'll tell you that on healers it's a little bit fuzzy because some casts take longer than others. Like Aspect to Helios is a longer than a GCD cast kind of a thing. And also, with all the off GCD stuff, or all of the times that healers are prepping for things, we're not always DPSing. But casts per minute is a good way to look and see if you could possibly DPS more if you're spending too much time standing around doing 0 things. One thing that I, as an astrologian, have been getting in the habit of trying to do now is I have 2 damage over times, 2 dots that are instant cast, which leaves me time in between those casts while I'm waiting on the GCD to replenish to draw a card or Royal Road a card or use Disable or run somewhere. So kind of look at what skills you're using and how can you use that to your advantage. Can you swift cast a spell and do it while moving to prepare for a mechanic? Can you swift cast a spell to buy yourself time to do something else off GCD, like Asylum or a Size? Those are things that you want to look at as a healer and really drill into to find out if you're being inefficient or if you could just be more efficient than you're already being. Um, I know as healers we tend to get a little opinionated over how we use skills and where we use skills, and it really pays off to kind of just push that voice to the back of your head and really look at what's going on. Again, I will show you guys in another recording how to do this for comparing your parse to another team's parse to see how your healing team is lining up with another healing team that's performing a little better than you, which is also information that's really helpful to have. But for now, I want you guys to get started with looking at yourselves, because that's more important. It's more important to be able to recognize your own flaws before you start comparing yourself to someone else. There's a couple other things that I want to show you really quickly in here before I wrap this up. The first thing is interpreting damage taken a little bit more. Not damage taken, damage taken. But I'm going to switch it to enemies. This is something that's not obvious in FFlogs. There really isn't a primer anywhere that tells you this. But when you look at this, these are color-coded. And I didn't realize for a really, really long time why they were color-coded. And then I figured it out, and it was like the world's biggest light bulb went off in my head. The red abilities are all magical damage. The yellow abilities are all physical damage. Why do we care? We care because when you're mitigating things like this, you really want to know what kind of mitigation you need. So for something like Critical Wrath, which is magic damage, and that's the party stack soak that the boss does at the beginning, and then again later in the fight there's a stack or spread mechanic during triple charge. That's magic damage. So there's some things you could do to mitigate it if you're having a hard time surviving it. We don't really mitigate it outside of I believe Vel deploys Adlo on the pole because it lines up for her cooldowns and how she's using them. And then, Ice Sinistry and Aspected Helios on the party to tick us back up from that. But if you're having a hard time surviving things like that, then you can start looking at whether or not you want to use Virus, whether or not you want to use Fey Covenant, which is an AOS ability that increases the group's magic defense. So knowing if something is magic damage or physical damage is really important. For example, Gobrush Rush Gob. Maybe you could virus that, but have a White Mage do it, because White Mage virus is only for physical damage. Or, say you're in a party and you're a Noctast and a White Mage paired together. You don't have Super Virus unless you happen to have a Summoner in your group. So knowing that you can still virus some of the abilities in here and have your Astrologian then use Disable on the magic damage abilities, that's really big. Because I know when I was maining White Mage, I was always looking for places where my virus would be useful because I felt like it was a button on my hotbar that I never got to push and it annoyed me. So knowing what kind of damage is incoming is really, really helpful. I will say some of these things are harder to mitigate than others using Virus and Disable. And then this purple one, I'm gonna guess that ACT is classifying that, because purple is supposedly unaspected damage. But if you look in the raw ACT log, let me see if I still have it pulled up here. So here's the raw log. This is all the nonsense that FFlogs pulls up and interprets. So if you look at it, scalability out. Gobsway Rumble Rocks, according to the raw ACT, is magic, but because it's not fire or ice or whatever, it's classifying it as unaspected. So that's the kind of situation where you can disable it. You may not necessarily be able to virus it. I believe you can, but if you're looking at things like, back in Midas and A6S, there were several points where things were darkness damage, which is not virusable. You could disable it, but you couldn't virus it. So that's information you really want to have in your toolkit. So again, red is magic damage, yellow is physical damage, purple is unaspected damage. So you want to get with your whole healer and get with your tanks and figure out how can you mitigate that damage. Sometimes mitigating damage isn't even about just surviving it. Sometimes mitigating damage is about getting as much DPS as possible out of something, because if it hits for less, you have to do less work. If you can let the hot just do its thing over time and stay in cleric stance because you mitigated well ahead of time, perfect, do it, go for it. The very last thing I want to talk about when you're talking about healer parses has nothing to do with this individual parse. And again, this has been quick and dirty, so if you want me, if somebody needs me to sit down and go through a parse with them line by line, absolutely I will. We'll figure something out. But I want to go into the Midgard All-Stars because there's a misconception for healer parses. So switch this to player damage. I'm going to switch this to Astrologian just because it's the class that I play. And I want to show you something. Okay, so now if you're looking at the All-Stars and you're looking at Refurbisher 0, like these two parses right here, Vel and I, our team did parse runs for A9S because it was fun and we were bored. So right off the bat, if you see a crazy insane number that's way, way over everyone else, disregard it completely because it's most likely a fed parse. So looking down here at Lame Bricks, because it's harder to get a fed parse on Lame Bricks Strike Box, you want to see this. Okay, so top 5 parses are all at about the 1000 DPS range, a little bit higher. Now earlier I talked about how you want to be aware of historical percentage and how that affects everything. So like Legia Umbron used to be an MVP Group 1. This is December 13th and he did just over 1000 DPS, which was at the time phenomenal DPS. It's still very good DPS, but the historical percentage on that may not be the same as the number of points that he got for it at the time. So just be aware of that. But what I really want to show you guys is something that's much more important that you consider when you're looking at FFlogs as a healer. And it's easier to see using Astrologians than it is to see using any other healer because we have 2 sects, and so sometimes our responsibilities are different. But we already know I'm a diurnal astrologian and I'm paired with a scholar. Neither one of us main heals or solo heals, so we know what kind of party comp I have. If you look at Aerith and Naya, now I'm not calling anyone out. This is not about me saying I'm better than someone else. This is about me showing you guys how you need to be thinking about your parses. So Aerith has a 90th percentile parse here. He did, or she did, I honestly don't know, 993 DPS. But look at their co-healer. They're paired with a white mage, so Aerith is in Noct Sect. Their healer only did 113 DPS. So when you're looking at logs, you want to be comparing apples to apples, not apples to oranges. So for me to compare myself to Aerith would be inefficient because of 2 reasons. The first is that Aerith is in Noct Sect, which means that he doesn't have the spell speed buff that I'm getting from Diurnal, which will lower his DPS right off the bat. The second thing is that Aerith's healer partner is not forcing him to support him or her as much as I'm forcing Vel to support me. So their DPS time is much higher than in a true 50-50 split. So that's something you want to think about. Looking at another one, Scarletta Vendetta. Scarletta is the same thing. She's a Noct Ast and is paired with a white mage that doesn't do any DPS whatsoever. So when you are comparing parses, make sure that you're comparing apples to apples. Make sure that you're not comparing yourself to a fed parse. So looking at these numbers, just glancing at them, tells you absolutely 0 things about your own skill in relation to these players. So beating yourself up about it is not good. Don't look at the top 10 and be like, oh, I'm never going to be as good as those people, because you have to look and see what are they actually doing. If you want to be in a party or a group where, one player heals and one player DPSs, that's fine. That's a completely and totally valid way to play the game. But then make sure that you are only comparing your DPS to other groups of the same setup. Don't compare yourselves to groups like Vel and I, where we are 50-50 splitting responsibility and trying to get our combined DPS as high as possible. Because all you're doing there is setting yourself up for some disappointment in the long run. It's not to say that either way is right or wrong, or either way is the right, or not the right way, but is more skilled. it's just that they're very different methods of attacking a fight. So just, again, when you're looking at healer parses, be aware of what the other groups are doing. Don't just look at the averages and then get sad, because you want to really look at what is truly going on. I hope that this helps you guys with your looking at your own personal parses. Again, I will do some more talking about how to compare your parses to another group's at a later time. But finding quiet time in my house is a little challenging. I had to get up early to finish this morning. So if you want to have me help you go through a parse of yours, or if you want to have me walk you through a parse of mine line by line and show you exactly how I'm looking at each individual ability and each individual thing that happens in the fight and how my partner and I are going to heal through it, I absolutely will do that. Just hit me up on Discord. If there's anything else I can do for you guys, then just let me know. And everybody have a great day.